Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to video number 2 on lesson 1.1, where we are solving simple equations. And you should have taken a few notes from the top of page 5, filled in your notes, and you can see that most of it is very similar to what we did when we started in video number 1. And so we still have a couple things we need to talk about. We need to talk about some more inverse operations. And it just so happens that multiplication and division are inverse operations. Why? Because they are opposite. Multiplication and division are opposite operations. They are inverse operations. And inverse operations undo each other. And for multiplication and division as inverse operations, they make one. They make one. That is because it is essential. Using the identity property of multiplication and division says that if you multiply or divide anything by 1, you will get that original number. And that's going to be very helpful in what we're going to be doing, just like making 0 was helpful when we added and subtracted. We also need those wonderful properties of equality to help us when the multiplication property of equality says that when I multiply each side of an equation by the same number, it produces an equivalent equation. In other words, if A equals B, then A times C is equal to B times C. And then we have the division property of equality, which says if I divide both sides of an equation by the same non-zero, remember, we cannot divide by 0. Well, we can, but it will give us an undefined answer. The same non-zero number, it also produces an equivalent equation. So if A is equal to B, then A divided by C would equal B divided by C. You can also write that in the fractional looking division form. A divided by C would equal B divided by C. All righty? Okay. Moving right along, let's get right into solving equations that have multiplication and division in them. And our first one, negative 5p is equal to negative 32. So our first goal is to isolate the variable. How do we isolate the variable? We isolate the variable by doing inverse operations. And if we are multiplying p by a negative 5, the inverse of that would be to divide by a negative 5. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 is equal to 1. And 1 times p, the identity property of multiplication says that that's p, right? And of course we need to do step 2, keeping the equation balanced, which involves properties of equality. It says whatever I do to the one side, dividing by negative 5, I must do to the other side. And I'm going to divide by a negative 5. And negative 32 divided by a negative 5, a negative divided by a negative is positive. And 32 divided by 5 is going to be 6 2/5, or you could go 6.4. Okay, however you choose to do that. So 6 2/5 is what I'm going to write as my final answer. Ladies and gentlemen, pretty straightforward. The same process over and over and over and over again. Once you have solving simple equations down, this is going to make your math a lot easier. Solving 2/3 y is equal to a negative 3 2/9. So once again, to isolate y, we need to do the inverse operation. If we are multiplying by 2/3, the opposite or inverse is to divide by 2/3. And 2/3 divided by 2/3 is 1. And 1 times y is y. And our second goal, keep the equation balanced, says whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other side. So this time, I'm going to actually put it right here. Divide by 2/3. Now we know that dividing rational numbers that look like fractions says we change it to multiplication by the reciprocal. We also know that in dividing rational numbers, you must change all mixed or whole numbers to improper. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a negative 3 2/9 and rewrite that as a negative 29/9. I'm going to change the division to multiplication, and I'm going to do the reciprocal of 2/3 and make that 3/2. Now, I can simplify before I multiply. 3 goes into 9 3 times, my bad. And so we're stuck right there. Now when I multiply across, I get negative 29 times 1, that's negative 29, and 3 times 2 is 6. And when I finish that answer, 6 does go into a negative 29 4 times, That will be a negative 4 because a negative divided by a positive is negative. So a negative 4 and 5/6. Right? Just going to leave it that way. Just going to leave it that way. Moving right along, we have c divided by 8 is equal to a negative 7. So once again, the inverse operation, if I want to isolate c, the inverse of dividing by 8 is to multiply by 8. And 8 times c over 8 simplifies out to 1. C divided by 1 is c. To keep the equation balanced, our second goal, I need to do the same thing to both sides, multiplying by 8. Negative 7 times 8 is a negative 56. Moving right along. X divided by a negative 5 is equal to a negative 4 and 3/5. So once again, I have to isolate the variable. We say this over and over in our head until it becomes automatic. Just like the many words that you read have become sight words, they are automatic. Making it automatic makes math easier, makes it more fluid, makes it more understandable. And so the inverse of dividing by negative 5 is to multiply by a negative 5. And of course, negative 5 into negative 5 one time. 1 times x, or 1 divided by, x times 1, or x divided by 1 will give me x. And so I need to do the same thing to both sides. I come over here and I multiply by a negative 5. The first thing I want to do, though, is make that improper so that I can make it easy. So I have a negative 23 over 5 times negative 5 over 1. And the 5 simplify out. Let's go back to purple there. The 5 simplify out, leaving that negative 1. Negative times a negative is positive 23 over 1. And so my answer is 23. Here we go. 18 pi is equal to a negative 3 pi x. 18 pi equaling a negative 3 pi x. So I want to isolate my variable. So you got to decide, well, what's my variable? Is it pi or is it x? Well, it's always x, because pi does represent a number. You should know that that is 3.14. It is a value that is represented by a symbol, and so that is not a variable. So we have negative 3 pi x. I want to isolate that variable x. The inverse of multiplying x by a negative 3 pi is to divide it by a negative 3 pi. Okay, this is the opposite. And a negative 3 pi divided by a negative 3 pi, that goes away, so we know it equals x. To keep the equation balanced, I need to do the same thing to both sides using properties of equality, which says dividing both sides by the same number, the same non-zero number, which is negative 3 pi. Well, pi divided by pi, that goes away. 18 divided by a negative 3 is negative 6. So x equals negative 6. Ladies and gentlemen, pretty straightforward. Well, let's get busy with our second quick write as our video lesson is complete. Please write down these two equations and solve them by isolating the variable, keeping the equation balanced, and of course, always be ready to ask questions if you need more help understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you tomorrow.